Hi, I'm Petra. That's what.
Hey, Petra. Hi.
What does it mean to be a spiritual person in the midst of the craziness of our, just our life these days? Whether it's raising children, going to work, having to deal with the pandemic, or our political situation.
Really practical ways to tap into spirituality. Science of Mind has done that for me, and I'm excited to be doing this work with Oscar and Petra to show you how you can get into your own spiritual ebb and flow and and say what? Live the life that you really want to live.
We're going to put hot topics, current events like meditation, law of attraction, and manifestation, all this stuff that you have questions about, that I have questions about. We're going to spin the wheel, and then wherever it lands is what we're going to talk about that day.
So we'll hope you'll join us on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. for Say What on YouTube Live.
Well, here we are. Yay, happy Tuesday, happy Say What Day. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're so happy to be here. And this could not be more timely because last week we talked about the mass shooting in Atlanta and that killed 8 people, 6 of which were Asian women. And then today, this week, just yesterday, we found out that there was a shooting in Boulder, Colorado that killed 10 people. I mean, it's just week after week. I mean, we're still talking about this a week later. It is a brand new shooting. It's just, I don't even know how to process it. 1 police officer died, 9 people died, and I saw some of the video, and people were just like people were helping each other in the stores and moving and exiting in a calm manner, as calm as possible. It's just, it's difficult to wrap my head around it. That it's just like, how is this a brand new week and we're starting the week with news of another mass shooting in America?
Yeah, and of course part of the problem is that this is not new.
Right.
So I just happened to look up on mass shootings in the U.S. and they've been keeping track of mass shootings in the U.S. since 1982. And I can remember a few years ago, I mean, it literally felt like every other week. And in school shooting and Black churches, and then, gay bars, and then tons of mass shootings actually are domestic violence.
Yeah.
Whole families slaughtered, including the suicide at the end. And yeah, it is difficult. It's difficult to wrap our minds around, and it's difficult to wrap, to me, it's difficult to wrap my mind around the rhetoric of freedom and privilege that is supposedly based on our Constitution, that makes it like, how could you possibly want to do anything other than just let everybody have a gun that wants to have a gun?
Right.
And my heart really bleeds for those teenagers who really did so much work after the shooting in Florida. And I mean, they were so right on. This has to stop. And there's just so many things wrong with the argument, right? I mean, there's so many things wrong with the argument. It's just not even funny. But somehow what I've noticed is that the rational argument for gun sense, gun control, thoughtful gun ownership, it's just met with emotional vitriol.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, to me, it's a deliberate ignorance. It's a deliberate, well, we just don't care because this is how we see it, and we don't care how it plays out.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it's fascinating because we see that the super majority of Americans are for universal background checks. Not just that, but tougher background checks. It should not be, you should be able to walk into a store and just like pick up a gun. Like,
Well, and really, tell me how many people need to have five, right? I mean, you
right.
want to go hunting? Of course. You want to go hunting, you have your hunting gun, you use it to hunt. And that's what you use it for, right? And the amendment, the Second Amendment, right, did not support individual universal gun ownership. Its purpose was to make sure that the government didn't impose its will on the people with violence. And therefore, it talked about militias being able to have guns for the sole purpose, not of protecting yourself from your neighbor, had nothing to do with your neighbors and the vilifying of black men and, as Islamic looking people and
Yeah.
whatever. It has nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with making sure that our democracy was not turned into an authoritarian regime through the military. That was its sole purpose.
Yeah.
And it was really only in 1972 that the NRA began the whole shift in the rhetoric about making it about your personal right to carry a gun so you could protect yourself against your neighbor. And that started in 1972.
Yeah.
There's no history to it. There's nothing that historically supports that idea other than the NRA putting that out as a conversation. And of course, then you start the whole tit for tat. Well, if they're going to have a gun, I better have a gun. Well, now, and it's, yeah, what is that idea? Nuclear deterrent. We'll just have more. We'll just promise never to use them, but we'll have more.
It's like nuclear proliferation. Like, it's like you get what you got that one, we're gonna build that one. Oh, you got more, we're gonna get more. Which I feel like you're exactly dead on. That's exactly what's happening. It's like, oh, they have a gun, well, I'm gonna get a gun. Oh, well, they bought an AR-15, well, I need an AR-7. Like, I'm like, oh, you guys, you don't need it. And you see the repercussions of it. It's like some of these shooters are grabbing guns from their parents, or like isn't even their guns. Like, oh my god.
My thing is that the gun doesn't do the harm. The person and the consciousness behind the gun does the harm. And so then we have to come back around to like our conversation last week. It becomes a conversation on ethnocentrism and then cosmocentrism. Are we just going to do things based on who we are by our ethnicities and by how we identify ourselves? Or are we going to identify ourselves with something greater, which speaks to our humanness and the sacred contract of being a human, and that you don't do these things to each other, period.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it just comes back around to that,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you say something really important, right? So on the one hand, we do actually have to keep guns out of the hands of people. We have to, I mean, that just seems, on the one hand, obvious. On the other hand, we've certainly put a weapon in everybody's hand by giving them a car. And what do? We require licensing. We require testing. We require ongoing testing. We require, and if you don't use it properly, right? You get fined. If you're a drunk driver and you kill somebody, not only do you go to jail, but you get your license revoked. I mean, there's consequences, right? And it's stunning to me that we've required seatbelts, and we've required airbags, and we've required that of the manufacturers because we know that people aren't going to do it on their own. Right. But we don't require it of the gun manufacturers. We don't require it of the gun sellers. We say, oh, we're going to leave it up to the people to police themselves, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole argument just makes no sense to me, right? There's nothing that makes rational sense to me. But my observation is that a rational conversation about the emotional conversation about gun ownership trumps the rational conversation about gun control, and it's that ability to create an emotional rhetoric that is that's really astonishing. And so I also looked up, it's not just ethnicity, Shakera. I also looked up on Google between 1982 and March of 2021, the mass shootings by the shooter gender.
Oh, I know this already.
Any guess?
Say it. I know this. I know the statistic. Say it.
I don't have a percentage, but 116 male shooters, 3 female shooters.
Yep.
Wow.
So what is that about?
Exactly. What is that
Say
about?
it, Petra. Say it. Just
Yeah.
go ahead and say it.
I mean, that's just astonishing to me. So we have the white gun owner for whatever that is about. And we also have the black gun owner for whatever that is about. And primarily, and we have the terrorist gun owner for whatever that is about, right? Both domestic terrorist and also international terrorist. And I don't know what that percentage is. Somebody can do the math. 3 to 116 men, boys also, as you pointed out, boys, right? And whether that's, and I know that mass shooting is considered anything over 4 people. The majority of them are, in fact, in the home. They are in home and family. They are usually of women and children that are killed. And then often ending up with suicide. And then, of course, we have the school shootings and the church shootings and the nightclub shootings and, the grocery store shootings.
Yeah.
And that's usually then, more than a larger percentage of people. But there's a documented relationship between a lot of the mass shootings and mental illness. So,
Or is it that it's always mental illness, or is that what is claimed as a cop out?
No, there's a documented relationship. Now, that doesn't mean all of them, not by any means. No, not by any means. But there is a documented relationship between mental illness and gun violence, domestic violence and gun violence, and the radicalization of ideology and gun violence, right? These 3 things are all, there's a direct correlation, right? And so really that's education, and that's actually licensing and sensible gun control. How do you license for that? I don't know, but it can't be that hard.
Right.
And we say to people, no, you can't have a car. We take it away from older people who can't see or who we think has dementia or can't make a decision, right? We don't you have to be a certain age to be able to drive a car, because we know younger than that, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because it has such a rippling effect. It's not just the shooter, and it's not just the people that are killed, but then it's the people whose families have been affected, and then the whole community that's been affected. And then once again, the nation is affected, and everybody reels from it. Or I suppose some people are cheering, or some people are like, yeah, whatever. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. That's a great point. What's concerns me is that it's starting to be normalized. Like, just watching the coverage, and like people, like they were saying, like by the second bang, they thought like, oh, the first one somebody dropped something. By the second one, they already like, oh, it's a shooting. Oh, we're in a shooting. This is America, and this is another mass shooting.
Right.
So let's go ahead, and they single file. This is by their own. The customers just grabbed each other and just single file filed out the door. They exited in the back. I'm like, this is our normal. Mm-hmm. Like, people knew by the third bang that like, oh, we're in a shooting now. This is happening. This is just part of our lives now. I'm just like, oh no. This is just like, it's becoming like normalized in our systems.
Well, yeah. And so what do schools do? They have active shooter drills.
Yeah.
So at our spiritual community, when we're back together again, we'll have a safety team that will know what to do if there's an active shooter. It's because it's becoming more normal, right? And so I think then you have, on top of that, you have the the pressure of population.
Yeah.
Right? You have the pressure of population. So these things tend to happen in more populated areas. Then you have the pressure of the economic situation. You have the pressure of economic inequities. Then you have the pressure of the racial inequities. You have the pressure of mental illness that's not being taken care of. You have the pressure of just the way our society devalues human beings. And quite frankly, the truth is we have the example of our media. Oh my God, how many shootings does a child see by the time they're 12? Just in the course of,
Yeah.
movies,
Right.
even movies that are PG. The only reason that they're PG is because they don't show the blood and the guts. But they see people shoot, and then they see that same actor the next day in something else, right? And so the whole idea of the consequence of shooting has been diminished. And if you have a hopelessness about life, well, what does it matter anyway? Right. And for me, I said this to somebody the other day. I don't know how people survive without spirituality and a spiritual community. I don't know. It's so easy then to become cynical and skeptical and fearful and angry and to really go, well, this is just the way it is, and I better protect myself.
Right.
Then to find some spiritual truths, and I don't mean like religious dogma or some, religious belief system, but some deep spiritual reality about the sacredness of life, the interconnectedness of life, and the unity of life, and the fact that we can actually behave like gods. We can create life and we can destroy it. And so that puts us in a whole nother ethical realm than just the lions and tigers that are trying to survive. Right. And we're in a whole nother level of reality with our own abilities. And so to make some sense of how to deal with the pressures of our own life and what does it mean when we see somebody who's different than us? I think about, okay, so you said this guy was maybe from Syria,
Mm-hmm.
which we immediately are going to jump to the fact that it's a terrorist act. Could be, might not be, who knows, right?
Even though he was raised in America, I guarantee you the rhetoric is going to come like, well, he's Syrian.
Right. And he could be
But is it called a terrorist act when a white person does it or when a black person does it?
Exactly. Why didn't we call last week's shooter domestic terrorist? No, we called him a sex addict instead. But now that this man who was born and raised in America, but is from Syria, I guarantee you he's going to be called a terrorist. I guarantee it. That's going to be the rhetoric.
Right. Yeah, it's really... So how do we find our way through all of that from a spiritual point of view? Right? We have to start telling the truth. We're all part of it.
Yeah.
We're part of the answer, but we're also part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Right? All these things that, that were just said. It's just, and so I find myself heartbroken about it. I get really angry. I get really heartbroken. And then the only place I know to go, because I don't want to be against things. I think that being against things really can, it just sets up antagonism, right? If I push against what you're for, we're just going to fight over it. And we just end up doing this. Right. For me, my question is always, what can I be for? And what can I be as passionately and strongly for as opposed to against? Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm for common sense gun control. I don't need to take everybody's guns away. I'm for common sense gun control. Right. I am for everybody absolutely being treated equally when these kinds of things are done. If you're going to treat a black person this way, then you have to treat a white person this way. If you're going to treat a white person this way, you got to treat, somebody from a Syrian background this way, or, right? And these are the kinds of things that, or I'm going to be for being thoughtful about our rhetoric, about what do we do when we're angry with each other. And this is the piece that I don't understand. Okay, so I don't care who you are. the guy who shot up the church down here in South Texas, right? He had a fight with his girlfriend, or was broken up or whatever, some domestic violence, a little bit of potentially really mental illness, goes in and shoots a bunch of people, like 29 people in a church, right? Somebody goes in and shoots 9 people. Was it 9 people in the AME church, right? What does this solve?
Right.
What is it? And I don't know. I don't know what they're going to decide about this thing in Florida. Sex people. That are going to try to lead you astray, or Asian. In either case, how does slaughtering 8 people change anything?
Right.
Right. I mean, how is that? So I'm just going to off you. I'm just going to. This is the whole quest. I mean, this is the whole thing about the idea that violence is the answer to everything, and individual violence is somehow the answer to things, or even, quite frankly, military violence is the answer to everything. We're just going to blow them up, and we'll, but especially when it's these individual acts where people are going in and just shooting people, and
so what's difficult is is reconciling the truth with because this is so hard for me, because I understand, not just understand, I know that we are all beings of love and light. We are individual expressions of the one. How do we maintain that vision, that truth, when you see another human being do that in a grocery store during a pandemic? This is the one place where people are able to come together. This is the one place. And you come in and shoot it up? I don't know how to... It's hard to reconcile what I know to be true with what I'm seeing out in this outside world. I don't even know how to process it.
Right.
Any advice on that?
Well, I definitely have thoughts about that. Shakera, what about you?
I think that yesterday you answered a question for me in class that I think would align itself with this here, is that it's a process, right? You talked about intentionality, and when an intentionality is then moved into with, engagement on that intentionality. Well, if we're going to continue to believe that everybody is created equal, that we're all human beings, or spirits having human experiences on this right here plane, then we have to move in that and continuously move in that. And we also have to hold those people when we have moved our minds from one state of being to another state of being, to a higher level of consciousness. I think that we have to hold the community of those that are not yet there accountable, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. I think accountability is very important for all people. So I really look at it, and this is just my personal view. Again, I don't speak for anybody but myself when I say this, but I think that if I have learned something, you are supposed to each one teach one, teach one, elevate one, and then operate differently from that understanding. Because this is not, it's not going to end well if we continuously retaliate. Well, oh, you did this, well, then I'm going to do this. That eye for an eye concept doesn't help anybody. And being fearful in the space of terrorism, no matter what person has enacted that terrorism, doesn't help anything either, because the opportunity to create a new reality is limited when you have to create from a position of fear, And so and I'm really passionate about this. So but it's bothering me. It's been bothering me all weekend. And I've had to listen to and watch the conversations between elders of my community saying things about Asian people. And it bothers me, because if this is the way that we're going to operate, and if as elders and people that are coming into this knowledge and understanding, we're going to teach apathy when somebody else is hurting, if we're going to teach hatred and retaliation of hatred, then what options are we leaving for our children and our children's children?
Yeah.
And anything beyond that. At some point, you got to be like, it ain't about you. Yeah. It's about everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
It ain't about you. It's about my baby and your baby and our babies. And so these types of things have been just rocking my soul over the weekend. So I am really, I don't didn't mean to continue to take any
No, it's
additional
good.
It's
You go
so
for it. You
good.
preach it,
It
girl.
is so good.
It's a thing. And I think that, like you said, Petra, I know that everything can't happen all at one time, but you know, if we are holding a vision and we are activating that vision and we are holding ourselves accountable to taking steps in that direction, individually and collectively, we're shifting consciousness. As we're doing that work, then we shift action to align with that
Yes.
consciousness.
Right.
And yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, Shakera. Absolutely. And I do think that's what it means to then, reach that moment of critical mass where all of a sudden there's such universal agreement that this is this and what that this is not okay, this can't continue. And what's astonishing is all the things that before the critical shift looked impossible, all of a sudden it's like they just fall into place because there's no right. And so that I think that's what it means to be a light worker, right? That's what it means to be a light worker, and to stay committed to the vision of an actualized human family, of an actualized oneness in humanity, not just the idea of it. I mean, we have to start with the idea. You have to start somewhere. You start with the aspiration of it. You start with a mystical experience of it, or a deep emotional a response to it, and then it begins to be actualized individually, right? And each one, as we're doing that, we are shifting consciousness. We're adding that unique piece that we have. We're shifting consciousness, and every time we behave it, we're modeling it, right? Each one teach one, each one show one, keep modeling it in our own lives to the best of our ability, right? And to keep trusting that turn is at some point inevitable, and that's where, for me, I stop worrying about, can I figure out how all these things are going to be fixed? Because over and over and over and over again, we've seen when consciousness shifts, all those things that seemed impossible all of a sudden are like no-brainers. There's because the shift has happened, right? And I think for me, it's interesting. I just had this. It's really basically the problem of good and evil, right? How is there evil in the world if we're all one and we're all light and we're all beautiful, loving, beautiful people? And where's God in all of this? Or how does that really work? And this is the challenge with being self-aware people. Or let me say, this is the challenge of being organs in which awareness is arising. The only way self-awareness can arise is for there to be choice. Otherwise you're a tree, you're a plant, you're a bird, and so you have to be able to, this is the advent of free will. And the whole story of the Garden of Eden is an allegory about what is it that the Adam and Eve ate of. They ate of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, which is the pairs of opposites, and the ability to choose in alignment with life or not, good and evil. Right? In alignment with spiritual truth or not in alignment. And without the ability to choose that, we're basically unconscious. We're not conscious. We're not self-aware. And so what we're seeing is humanity playing out all the choices that are available. And what our job as light workers is to be educated by the choices, whether they're our own choices or choices other people make, is to be educated by them and say, see, that doesn't work. Just exactly what you said, Shakera. At some point, it's not about you. It's not, at some point, you can't just say, well, I'm going to get them back, right? I have to see that this feuding thing that happens this is a series of choices that goes nowhere. So I'm going to step out of it in some form or fashion. And so that's the creation, that's the advent of laws. That's the advent of social and civil laws, was exactly what the point of all of that was. So that it wasn't me saying you can't do that anymore, so I'm going to come kill you. It's like, no, we have an agreement, a lawful of laws in the world. Of course, granted, they're not equitably applied.
Right.
No, I mean, right? But that is the aspiration
Yeah.
of a set of laws, a civil set of laws, is to say you are held accountable. You are held accountable for behaviors that are dangerous or that are out of integrity with what allows a society to thrive and grow. And we keep, as we mature as a human beings, as a human race, right, we keep expanding and changing and shifting, which is what's so scary for people about what it means to thrive and grow, right? Because that means more people have to be included, more things are okay in some form or fashion. But there's a place where, no, it's not okay. And so that's the problem of evil, is really the outpicturing of ignorance. I believe that because I'm in so much pain, if I shoot you, I'm going to feel better.
Right.
Or I believe that I am so angry that, and you're taking something from me. So if I shoot you, it's going to fix it. Or, if I rape you, or if I take something from you, or whatever, right? This is a complete ignorance of the love and light that we actually are. And the fact that we actually are universally supported. We are supported by the universe, regardless of whether we're supported by the structures of society, we're still supported by the universe. And the more that we can see that about ourselves, and the more that we can see that about others, the more we can step out of that tit for tat, eye for an eye, tooth, right? And say, I choose not to behave that way. I'm not going to get into that cycle, but I am going to hold you accountable. Right. And I think sometimes in spirituality, we move to such a place of, well, I'm going to step out of it. I'm just going to be a light worker. I'm just going to hold the light, and it's all going to be okay. And I love, accept you the way you are. No, sorry. You can't rape a child. Sorry. You can't go into a grocery store and shoot people. I don't care, because it damages the fabric of society. And people will say, well, how will you know if you let gay people marry? How will you know that people won't be having sex with animals? It's like, really? Are you freaking kidding me? This is not rocket science. Really, it's not rocket science. But I'm using all these examples because I'm uncomfortable with that over there.
Right.
Right. And it's astonishing to me the weight that emotional rhetoric has compared to rationality and a sense of the spiritual groundedness and the sacredness and the holding of sacredness of life. And the power of choice. It just, but that's what I think, when you ask Oscar, how do you hold that? How do you bend your mind around it? That's how I bend my mind around it. And I have my feelings, and I get mad, and I get sad, and I get frustrated. I have those feelings and let them, I do have them, and I let them up and I let them out. I try not to have them run my thoughts and behaviors. So my thoughts and behaviors have to then reground myself in spiritual truth, and in that deep accountability. It's an interesting task, I think, to hold someone accountable without A, being against them, or B, seeing them as broken. Right? Seeing them outside of the truth of the divine reality that they are, whether they're expressing it or not, especially when they're not expressing it. When the ignorance, the veil of their own pain and the way that they were raised and the blah, that all, it makes that appearance of separation.
Yeah.
And that's you don't talk about a spiritual practice. Oh my God, that is a spiritual practice. Right?
Yeah.
Because we want to retaliate, or we want to put our head in the sand. Right? One or the other. And neither one of them move humanity forward.
Wow. I love that. Yeah. Speaking of moving humanity forward.
Oh, let's pick something fun.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I do hope that it's a fun one because we need it.
Um,
And a one, and a two, and a what is it? Communication. That could mean a myriad of things. That could be about conflict. It could be about, perhaps dealing with toxic people. I mean, this is a giant conversation.
it is a
Communication.
giant conversation,
Well, hang
right?
on a second though. This is in the same vein as communication. So we talked about the emotional rhetoric and how it doesn't always align with the spiritual truth. Is there a way we can make the spiritual truth itself an emotional rhetoric so that it resonates just as loudly as this other stuff?
Well, there, my friend, you have asked the $64,000 question,
Yeah.
right? And I believe that is what the light workers of the world today are seeking to do, is to build the vision, and that's and to speak the vision into being. Essentially, I just read a really interesting article, and it's not the first time that I've read this, but it comes out of humanities and literature, and of course, it's straight up the alley of spirituality, and that the way in which human beings organize their understanding of their current reality or their life or what's happening around them is they embed it in story. And it is the way that we narrate life. We are literally narrating ourselves into the next moment. So if I narrate the story of I am a woman and will always have a glass ceiling because there's always going to be some guy who's going to be put ahead of me, and I can tell you, and here's where I had that, and here's where I had that, and I'm just tired of always having to fight. Right? Do you see? I'm narrating myself into giving up and believing that I can never accomplish getting through that glass ceiling. I could narrate the story differently. Man, I really feel like I'm up against a glass ceiling, and it feels like it's really holding me here. And yet I've researched some stories, and I'm inspired by these women who have made it through. They have found another way, and I'm really called to this way of being that isn't just trying to be a man in a man's world, but actually bringing my feminine energy to it. And I'm using my spirituality to really ground it in that. Do you see? I'm narrating.
Yeah.
I'm literally narrating the story into, and so we have to narrate ourselves so we can keep telling the story about how awful it is, and how humanity sucks, and we haven't gotten it together, and we're still treating Black and brown people horribly, and we're still shooting people, and we're still this, and we're still that, right? And we can continue to narrate that story, or we can narrate and here's the movement, and here's where we see at least some incremental movement, and here's one person. If I can find one person who's actually doing it differently, I can begin to tell that story, right? And that's what it means, I think, to have aspirational vision, is we start building that, and we start narrating it, and then we start looking for and finding evidence that supports that story that we're narrating, because we can sure as hell find evidence that supports the negative story. There's no question about it, right? But there is lots of evidence for a different story as well. And so we build that vision, and then we narrate ourselves into it. And this is one of the places where I get so passionate. I've been an environmentalist since the 70s. And the environmental story since the 70s has been doom and gloom. Well, who wants to read about and talk about doom and gloom? Why do you think all the white people don't want to have the race conversations? Because they're sick and tired of being made wrong. And the Black people don't want to have the race conversations because they're sick and tired of being angry. And they're sick and tired of being, being treated like they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. Or, right? Because it's all about what's wrong, and how horrible it is. And in the 2000s, there was a giant study done. We've known what's going on with climate change since the 70s. How come nothing has been done? And with with lots of studies and research and, you know, opinion polls, and I don't know what all they did for a number of years. They determined it was because the environmental movement couched their entire narrative in the negative. If you don't do this, we're going down the tubes. You are doing this with your plastic, with your fossil fuels, with your blah, blah, blah. And it's you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Right? Well, who wants to hear that? People run screaming from the room. Then nobody wants to be made wrong like that. But the environmental movement didn't cast a vision. If we could today get a hold of energy that would harness the sun and the winds without putting all these toxic fumes and putting out the, you know, ozone stuff, we could achieve a future like this. Your children would grow up in an experience like this. Our fisheries would explode. Our fishermen would not have to have such tight you know, catch limits, and they right. It's in that narrative, and so, but it's harder to build the positive narrative without sounding or feeling Pollyannish,
Right.
because the negative narrative has so much evidence to it.
Yes.
Right. And so what we do instead of speaking the positive narrative is we look for rationality. And rationality is no emotional pull. It's important, it's necessary, but it actually has no emotional pull. And so we actually have to learn to unabashedly, in confidence and larger than life, speak about what's possible. Speak, and we will literally narrate the new vision into being. Will it take time? Of course. But we have to be willing, and we have to be willing to be ridiculed and laughed at. I mean, even my son, bless his heart, he was raised in science of mind. And when he was, I don't know, 17 or 18, maybe 19, I can't remember now, he said, "Oh God, Mom, couldn't we just have this conversation without all that science of mind shit?"
Oh, shit. Oh, no.
No, actually, because it's how I look at life.
Yeah.
I actually look at life positively. I do actually expect things to work out. And I do know that if I align myself with spiritual truth and I do that kind of work, and I'm willing to look at my stuff and blah, 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 it actually makes a difference. Right. But that didn't feel real to him.
Yeah.
And so it's right. So we have all the utopian. And so I think, so let me just finish my little tirade here. I think the problem is that we have couched the possible and this positive expectation of narrating life into being. We have couched it into, I don't know how to say this, utopian forms. And then we're all going to live happily ever after, and it will all be wonderful. Well, everybody knows that's bullshit.
Right.
Right. And so it's the narrating the possibilities, I think, that have feeling and flavor and quality without necessarily saying this is the form in which it has to look. Because it's so easy then to pick the form apart.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to do that?
Right.
Well, what if people don't like that? Well, what if they don't agree? Well, I don't agree. Well, I don't think that's possible. Well, what we're on, you know, and whatever the, you know, we're talking about energy or education or equity or women or whatever we're talking about, right? There, if we get too detailed in the form, it's too hard to pick it apart, I think. And then it's just cast off as utopian, Pollyannish, whatever.
Yeah.
Nonsense.
That Pollyanna thing really is really important to me. Because like being an actor and seeing the behind the scenes and seeing how marketing works and what's worked and what doesn't. Like we saw all the Olive Garden commercials and how just cheesy, over the top Pollyanna it was, and just it was like just did not do well. I've discovered actually the antidote to poly, like it's still a positive message, but you get rid of that, like that flavor. It's humor. If you can make them
Oh.
laugh, you've hooked them in. That's it. If you can make them laugh, you've already hooked them. So
Mm-hmm.
what's happening now is a lot. You see that a lot of commercials are humorous. It's
Mm-hmm.
they try to put in some kind of, either whether it's awkward humor or situational humor, but you see a lot of it is humor because they've discovered like we still want it to be positive, but we can't have it be cheesy. Please, Lord,
Right.
because in today's 2021 and media age, cheesy will kill your ad immediately. It's like, oh, that's
Right.
gross. Like I'm not. That's not real life.
Well,
That's
because it's not real. Right.
exactly. It's not real. But so even
Right.
though it's positive, if you can make it funny, that's the hook.
Well, and that's the that's the difficulty with spirituality, because
Right.
spirituality doesn't rely on the real,
Yeah.
right? It sometimes is the exact reverse of worldly wisdom.
Exactly.
How can you be
Exactly.
forgiving in the face of, betrayal? How can you love in the face of an active shooter? How can you trust in the face of the massive social inequity? Right. And this is where spirituality calls us to that deep, deep, deep practice. And to me, it's a practice of double vision. I have to be able to see through the real to spiritual truth. And and yeah, and there's something about authenticity that's really important. But the way in which we denigrate spirituality and spiritual truth is we cling to facts and to realness. Like it's like, and I mean, people do it with their, well, money's real, like the economy's real, so spirituality, whatever. Or hate is real, so we have to fight against hate and discrimination. So spirituality, whatever,
Yeah.
love, whatever. Right? And yet it can't be just love. I think Shakera you hit the nail on the head. It's got to be with accountability. I mean, that's what tough love is. Fierce love is accountability. I love you enough to tell you the truth. I love you enough to hold you accountable for the fact that you have now removed yourself from humanity by shooting people in a grocery store. Sorry, end of sentence. I don't even care whether you're a terrorist or Syrian or born in America or not.
Yeah.
Really, ultimately, no.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
No.
No.
And I can still see that you're a child of God, and you come to some deep revelation. You will actually become a healed individual, whether we ever let you out or not, I don't know, but you will become a healed individual. And so, these are, I mean, this is, and I think that and I think you've also said something really important, is that the economic engine, which is based on creating a sense of lack in your life and causing you to want more stuff, right? And then overselling everything. You're going to be sexier if you buy this washing machine. Like, what?
That's
What,
real.
Okay,
We laugh about it, but it's
wash
real.
my clothes like that girl on that
Yeah,
commercial.
this is how I wash my clothes. Like,
Yeah.
I know. It's like,
what are you doing?
right? So of course we're not stupid, right? Especially our kids that have grown up with this 24/7. So what has happened is we've created a culture of cynicism.
Yep. You're
Everything's
so right.
suspect. Everything's suspect because everything is oversold, and everything is sold in, well, we're going to make you happy and successful and desirable, and you're going to be desirable until you're 80, and then you're going to be fabulous, and everything's going to be fabulous and wonderful if you just buy my product.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, that thing which takes the toenail, cleans your toenails. Not that anybody's going to see it, but I promise you, you're going to be sexy and fabulous.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so, so on the other hand, right, we've become suspicious of all of that. And so how do you then narrate truth into being when we're all somewhat skeptical and suspicious? And I think maybe that's where that humor thing comes in, Oscar, where it's trying not to take it so seriously, trying not to pretend that every spiritual truth is going to like, okay, now you're enlightened.
Yeah.
It'll always be perfect from here on out.
Right.
Now you're going to be the best
Yeah.
you're going to be. Now you're going to always be prosperous. Now you're, it's like, okay, well, my experience is I've been doing this for a really long time, and every day I'm a little better than the day before, but I'm still working on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So communication, I don't know what that has to do with communication.
Everything, I think.
I think it has a lot to do with communication, because when you have a foundational recognition of spirituality or anything that you're doing as starting in the spirituality or the principles of your spirituality, then your internal communication, or what we call it at Howard, because my degree's in communication, so this is my junk. But the intrapersonal communication, that communication that's happening within ourselves, is narrated right. Those affirmations, what we affirm about ourselves, the story we tell ourselves, and the things that you were just mentioning, Petra, and then that interpersonal communication. So when we leave ourselves and then deal with humanity, we're dealing with how we communicate and deal with each other, like we're on this call right now. And so when you were talking, Petra, you talked about the stories and everything, and just like the vision that we paint for ourselves. What about our pledges to ourselves? I remember I was in a class with Brianna, our managing director, and she was teaching us things about conscious parenting, and I totally love like just her way of doing this work. But she talked about, what if you had a pledge for your family, where every day you and your children could recite that pledge, right? And you can hold yourselves accountable to that. And so one of the things that me and Louis had already started doing was we had started a warrior pledge, right? And it's not to say warrior as in we worry about everything, right? Not to break down the word into that kind of energy, but that we stand for something, right? And we continuously stand for that thing. And so one of the lessons out of our pledges, we learn that we may teach, and we teach that we may learn. Mm-hmm. And so whenever we have a moment where there needs to be some learning or some teaching, I say, we learn that we may what? And my son says, teach. And I say, and we teach that we may what? And he says, learn, right? And then one of the other things in our home is be loving or be what? Nothing. Be loving or be nothing, period. So when there's spats in the house, we have to be loving or be what? Somebody has to hold the home accountable. And if everything starts at home, and if we start the foundations of our homes in spirituality and spiritual truth, I think then there's another answer to the question, Oscar, about how we emotionalize that, and then how we take that out into the world in which we live.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just my.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't diminish what you're sharing by saying that's all really, really good. That's all really, really powerful, right? And I think you're right. I think the communication starts with how we talk to ourselves. It's how we talk to those people who are closest to us. I mean, I'm stunned at how many people I know, are totally gracious out in the world and then are not gracious at home at all. And yeah. And so I'm just loving this word accountability.
Yeah.
It's a word that I've really become very fond of in the last, I don't know how many years, accountability. And to be accountable for my words, I have to be accountable for the intention of my words. I have to be accountable for the impact of my words. I have to be accountable for the fact that my words are filtered through my point of view. I have to be accountable to recognize that you're going to hear it through your point of view. I have to be accountable to speak, and I have to be accountable to listen. Both of them, and both of them are equally important. And and am I willing to be accountable to the relationship to keep speaking and listening? Or do I just walk away, or do I just shoot you down? Right? And both rhetorically and not, as the case may be. And that is, that's a spiritually mature and grown up place. And am I going to be accountable to protecting myself, or am I going to be accountable to my deepest aspiration of being spiritually aware and spiritually woken up? Wow. And, and it's easy. I mean, I think the thing that's taught me some of that the most from hard and painful experience. Not only are they the times that I've just, in response, but even more so the times when I have not paid attention. I have not restrained myself from sending that text or email.
Mm.
Uh-oh.
I've done it too.
Right? And to take that moment to stop and be, is this actually not only what I want to communicate, but the way I want to communicate it? And is that the vehicle? Am I really brave enough to just pick up the phone and say, this is not acceptable to me. I'm not okay with how this came down. Or I really want to talk about this. I'm pretty uncomfortable with it. Besides just, cutting you off at the knees with a text or an email. So I have to be accountable to all of that, right? And oh my God, have I gotten, some pretty ugly exchanges. I've watched it on Facebook. Good enough, I haven't done any of those, but email exchanges or text exchanges that have really woken me up to that deep level of accountability.
Yeah.
Right.
And even that itself is communication. This is like a whole new thing that like we're all learning. Like texting, there's like texting etiquette and email etiquette. Like, like we grew up in like, how do you speak to each other politely? And now we're in this age where it's etiquette isn't just in person anymore. It's texting etiquette and email etiquette. And how do you behave online and comments? It is fascinating. And it's all connected. It's all communication.
It is all communication.
Yeah.
Shakera, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah, I was saying I agree with that. And then I also agree with once you hold, that conversation, making sure that if there's a boundary that has to be in place so that accountability can be held is also okay. Once you decide what works for you and you've had that communication, no is a sentence by itself.
That's right. I
love that. It has to be reinforced. No is a sentence by itself, and it can be sweetly said. And no.
Yep. And there's many ways you can say no. No, I'm sorry. No, I can't do that. No, that really doesn't work. No, I'm sorry. No, no, that's not going to fit in. No. I mean, there's lots of ways of saying it, but it is actually a complete sentence. That's exactly right. And the other thing I learned, Shakera, along the lines of that, especially in the challenge of dysfunctional or toxic relationships, is that I don't need to justify, defend, explain, or make you understand my no. I just get to say it, right? So I remember that I was taught as Jude, justify, understand, defend, or explain. I don't need to justify it. I don't need for you to understand it. I don't need to defend it. And truthfully, I don't need to explain it. A no is a no. Now, if you want to ask me about it, if you want to have a conversation with me about it, I may decide that we can explore it some more. But it's not required. I get to just say no. And yeah, that it's so important. But then the other side of that coin is I have to hold myself accountable for keeping my no. How many times do we become uncomfortable with the no?
Yeah.
Or we, and I've seen very toxic communications where people are punished for their no. They're punished with anger or with withdrawal or whatever. And so they're taught that their no is dangerous and damaging to the relationship. Right. And yet I have to be willing to say no, regardless of your response. So I may understand that my communication is going to have an impact. And then I have to make a decision as to whether or not I'm willing to live with the consequences of that impact. Sometimes I'm not, because I realize the impact is going to be really hurtful. Other times I am, because I realize that the impact is actually going to make you mad, but I'm still going to stick with my no.
Absolutely.
Right. But at least I've attended to the impact. I haven't been unconscious or oblivious to the impact. Right. And so again, what do? We, even in communication, we roll back around to consciousness, right? To be conscious and aware of things. In the Buddhist tradition, they call it mindfulness. And in the psychological tradition, right, paying attention. And that's what it means. It's one of the many things that means to be conscious. I'm actually present, and I'm accountable in the moment to the way I'm showing up, to the way I'm speaking, to the way I'm, accountable to myself, all of that. And that's a big, tall order.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely,
right?
It is.
And so now I'm going to get this. This is why I get a little upset when people say spirituality is all Pollyannish. I'm like, this is freaking hard work. What are you talking about?
It's hard.
You can just have whatever you want, and you can just think that you can do whatever you want. It's such bullshit. Okay, if you really want to talk about it, let's talk about being accountable to your thoughts and your actions and your words, and are you integrity, and are you in alignment with spiritual truth, regardless of what, it's like, really, don't even.
Yeah,
don't
I mean,
even
when I first came, like, I remember the first 6 months, I was like, wow, I am just constantly calling out my own shit left and right. I'm like really looking at all of my shit. This is so uncomfortable. Right. Why am I doing this?
Right.
Oh my God, it was so hard. Yeah.
But what are the rewards?
Oh, everything. Everything, complete freedom. I mean, just everything. The rewards are endless. It's incredible. But I remember the first, coming. It was rough, man. It was rough to like suddenly spot like, oh shit, I do have these patterns. Right. Oh, I do have this false belief about myself, and here it's manifesting left and right. It's the same thing again and again. It's because of, yeah. So it was cute. It was a cute time. Yeah, but and again, like you said, it's a process. I'm still, I'm still working stuff out.
Right? Absolutely. And we keep going deeper and get cleaner and clearer and more in alignment, right? And then when the shit hits the fan, we're operating in present moment, as opposed to dragging, ages of the past with us.
Exactly right.
The first thing that has to be done is all that past stuff has to be looked at and cleared out. Doesn't mean we're going to behave perfectly each and every time, but at least we're in the moment, and we're able to be conscious. We're not, dragged back into some old garbage.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I feel like now when something happens, it's actually it actually is me responding now.
Yes.
It's not just like my old, it's not my old shit kind of programming on autopilot. It's like, no, I get to really be here and really be with you and really respond to whatever is happening. So that's been like the greatest gift. It sounds like this episode needs like a sequel.
It's like every episode needs.
I know every episode we need a freaking sequel. There's so much to talk about.
There is so much to talk about.
Gosh. Shout out to Louis. He's here on YouTube with us. He commented, and also to Elaine Ramirez. You guys are awesome. Thanks for joining us, you guys. So we'll be back next week, every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us. You can find out all new information about all the stuff we have coming up, especially Easter. Y'all watch out for April 4th. Sunday, April 4th. Y'all have to be there. It's going to be epic. CSLDallas.org. All the information. We love you so much. We'll see you next week.